The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across Maple Grove Lane as I stood on the porch of our new home, keys still warm in my hand. It was supposed to be our fresh start, a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood just outside the city where families raised kids and retirees walked their dogs at dusk. Elena and I had saved for years to afford this house. We thought we were buying peace. We didn't know we were stepping into a battlefield with invisible rules enforced by the Maple Grove Homeowners Association. My name is Marcus Reed. I'm a civil engineer who spends most days designing bridges and roads. Elena is, well, Elena. She keeps her work separate from our home life, and I've always respected that. What happened on that ordinary Tuesday afternoon changed how everyone on our street saw us, and how we saw our so-called community. It started small, the way these things usually do. We moved in during the first week of spring. The moving truck had barely left when a neatly dressed woman in her late 50s appeared at our driveway holding a clipboard and a forced smile. Her name was Patricia Langford, president of the HOA. "Welcome to Maple Grove," she said, her voice sweet but sharp. "We just want to make sure everyone maintains the standards that make our neighborhood special." She handed me a thick booklet, Maple Grove Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions. 47 pages of rules covering everything from the exact shade of beige allowed for shutters to the approved height of flower beds. No visible trash cans. No flags larger than 3 feet by 5. No vehicles parked on the street overnight. No excessive noise after 8 p.m. Elena had been inside unpacking. She stepped out wearing jeans and an old college sweatshirt, her dark hair tied back. Patricia's eyes flicked over her, then back to me. "We look forward to your cooperation," Patricia said before walking away. Elena watched her go. "That was friendly," she said dryly. I laughed. "It's just paperwork. We'll keep things neat." We tried. We really did. But life doesn't follow covenants. I had a small workshop in the garage where I restored an old motorcycle on weekends, a project my father and I started before he passed. One Saturday morning, I left the garage door open while I worked. 2 hours later, a formal warning letter appeared in our mailbox citing unsightly storage of mechanical equipment. Then came the bird feeder. Elena loved watching cardinals and finches from our kitchen window. She hung a simple feeder on a post in the backyard. Within 3 days, another letter. Violation of landscaping guidelines. Structures over 4 feet require approval. We paid the small fines. We adjusted. But the letters kept coming. A complaint about our recycling bins being visible for more than 12 hours. Another about my truck, which had a small dent in the fender from a construction site, being aesthetically displeasing. Elena remained calm through it all. "They're bored," she said one evening as we sat on the back porch. "People with too much time invent problems." I wasn't as patient. The stress started affecting my sleep. I found myself checking the windows at night, wondering if someone was watching us. Then came the final straw. It was a Tuesday in early June. I had just returned from a long day at the office. Elena was due home from work soon. She had the later shift that week. I pulled into the driveway and noticed a bright yellow notice taped to our front door. Final notice. Immediate compliance required. The violation? Our American flag. We had hung a modest one near the front porch, the kind thousands of homes display. According to the HOA, it violated their uniform aesthetic policy because the pole was 4 inches too tall. They gave us 48 hours to remove it or face escalated enforcement. I crumpled the notice in my fist. That evening, Elena listened quietly while I vented. She had changed into comfortable clothes, but carried herself with that quiet authority she always had. She never talked much about her job, only that it involved keeping order, and that some days were harder than others. "We'll handle it," she said simply. Together. The next morning, I left for work early. Elena was still home when I left. I didn't know that Patricia Langford had already made a phone call. At 6:17 p.m., I pulled into our street and saw the flashing lights. 2 police cruisers were parked directly in front of our house. 4 officers stood on the lawn, 2 speaking with Patricia and 2 other HOA board members, the rest looking toward our front door. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered across the street, whispering. My heart slammed against my ribs. I parked quickly and walked up, trying to keep my voice steady. Officers, what's going on? One of the policemen, a sergeant with a name tag reading, Hale, turned to me. Sir, we received a complaint about an ongoing violation of local ordinances and HOA rules. The board says you've been warned multiple times and are now refusing compliance. They also mentioned possible trespassing concerns regarding some equipment in your garage. Patricia stood with her arms crossed, looking satisfied. We've tried reasoning. At this point, we need enforcement. I stared at them in disbelief. It's a flag. And some tools in my own garage. This is ridiculous. Sergeant Hale sighed. Look, we don't enjoy these calls, but we have to respond when a formal complaint is made. If you could just... The front door opened behind me. Elena stepped out. She was still in uniform. The dark blue fabric was crisp, the badge on her chest catching the last light of the sun. Lieutenant Elena Reyes-Reed, Military Police, currently assigned to a joint task force with local law enforcement. The silver bars on her collar, the duty belt, the way she carried herself, it all hit the scene at once. The officers froze. Sergeant Hale's mouth actually opened slightly. One of the younger cops took an instinctive half-step back. Patricia's triumphant expression melted into confusion, then something closer to panic. Elena's voice was calm, professional, and ice-cold. Good evening, officers. I'm Lieutenant Reyes-Reed. Would someone like to explain why 4 patrol units are on my property over a flagpole and a garage? Sergeant Hale recovered first. Ma'am, Lieutenant, we were called for a civil dispute involving HOA violations. Elena glanced at Patricia, then back at the sergeant. Her eyes were steady. I see. And you determined that this required multiple officers and emergency lights. Why exactly? The silence stretched. One of the neighbors across the street had started recording on their phone.
Patricia tried to speak.
Lieutenant, we have rules that everyone must follow. Elena cut her off with a look. Not loud. Not angry. Just the kind of look that comes from someone who has spent years dealing with far more serious matters than lawn decorations. Mrs. Langford, I've read your covenants. Nowhere in them does it authorize you to summon law enforcement for aesthetic disagreements. Misuse of emergency services is a serious issue. I should know. I help train officers on when to respond and when not to. She turned back to Sergeant Hale. Sergeant, do you have a copy of the specific ordinance being violated? Or was this a welfare check that somehow turned into an HOA enforcement action? The officers looked at each other. Sergeant Hale cleared his throat. It appears there may have been some overreach in the call. Elena nodded once. I suggest you document this appropriately. And perhaps remind the board that filing false or exaggerated complaints can have consequences. The officers began to disengage. No citations. No further discussion. They got back into their cruisers with visible relief. The lights stopped flashing. As the cars pulled away, the neighbors slowly dispersed, murmuring. Patricia stood frozen on the lawn, her clipboard now hanging uselessly at her side. Elena looked at her for a long moment. We are happy to be good neighbors, Mrs. Langford, but we will not be harassed. If you have a legitimate concern, bring it to us directly. Otherwise, I expect this to be the last time we see police at our door over nonsense. Patricia left without another word. That night, Elena and I sat on the back porch again. The flag still flew gently in the evening breeze. I didn't want to pull rank like that, she said quietly. But they crossed a line. I reached for her hand. You were incredible. I had no idea how bad it had gotten for you to come out in uniform. She smiled faintly. Most days I try to leave the job at the gate. But some situations you handle them with what you have. Over the following weeks, things changed on Maple Grove Lane. Several neighbors quietly approached us to apologize. They admitted they had grown tired of Patricia's heavy-handed leadership, but were afraid to speak up. One older couple confessed they had received similar treatment when they installed a small ramp for their disabled son. A petition started circulating, respectfully worded, asking for a review of the HOA board and more reasonable guidelines. Elena and I stayed out of the politics, but we supported the idea of balance. Patricia resigned 2 months later. In her farewell note to the neighborhood, she cited personal reasons. The new board was more moderate. They revised several of the most extreme rules, including the flag policy. Our little corner of the street became known, in a quiet way, as the place where common sense returned. Months later, I stood in the same driveway watching Elena help our new neighbors and young family with 2 kids unload their moving truck. She was in civilian clothes this time, laughing at something the father said. The flag still hung proudly by our door, now joined by a small wind chime Elena had bought as a housewarming gift for them. I thought about how close we had come to letting fear and bureaucracy ruin what was supposed to be our safe haven. And how one moment, my wife stepping out in uniform, had reminded everyone that real authority isn't loudest when it shouts rules. It's quietest when it stands for what's right. Maple Grove is still a beautiful neighborhood, but now it feels like a community, not a rulebook with houses attached. And every evening when the sun sets and that flag catches the light, I remember the day the cops froze at our door, and the woman in uniform who quietly restored order without raising her voice.